What's your opinion on the decline of marriage in the U.S.?
Well, the reality is a lot of people stayed married that shouldn't have stayed married. And if you statistically, the failure rates, depending on the study, it seems like the numbers kind of fluctuate every few years. Sometimes you got 50, 55%. Sometimes I've seen studies that say as high as 65% of the marriages don't work. So you got a 50, 60% chance that it's going to end in divorce. Obviously, the last thing when people are in love or they're getting married is, especially on their wedding day, the last thing they're thinking is getting divorced. But statistically, your downside risk is 50 to 60% failure rate somewhere in there. If you were investing in a stock and you invested in stocks that 50 to 60% of your stocks lost value, you pretty much always would lose money. You wouldn't
Yeah.
gain money. And so, from that perspective, and then with the internet and mass media, because like when I was growing up, we had ABC, CBS, NBC. We had some UHF channels. We had cable like CNN, and I think there were originally in the early days there were like maybe 100, 110 other cable channels. There may have been like a station in Atlanta that they broadcast all over the country, so they got a bigger reach. And then you had the newspapers and radio, and that was the only way you got information. It was all pre-internet, and now you've got all this information out there, like the stuff like that I teach is out there. And in the old days, when you wanted to study self-help or you had a problem with something, you went to the self-help section in the bookstore,
Yeah.
and there's maybe two small aisles of it, and so there wasn't a lot of information out there. There certainly weren't books like mine out there, and so there's information. And especially like in blue states, there's just lots of. I mean, we see with celebrities all the time. They get married and they're married for a year or two, and because they live in California or wherever they get married at, it's like they're married for a few years and they're given tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars,
Mm-hmm.
and their net worth to these women that they were only married to for a few years, and they did nothing
Yeah.
except marry a rich guy, and because the laws in the state are just unfair. And then as soon as these guys write this giant check, it's like the ink is not even dry on their divorce papers, and they're marrying somebody else again. And I think a lot of people have looked at it, and you know, you can cohabitate. Lots of people are having kids. I mean, you look at like a Kurt Russell and a Goldie Hawn. It's they lived together and had a family, and they people were like, "Why don't you get married?" It's like it works for them. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't involve the state in their relationship, and they've been together, I don't know, 40 years, whatever it is, and they
Yeah.
seem pretty happy and seem to really deeply care for one another. And they didn't get married, and I went through one divorce when I was in my 20s. I was married for a year, and I was young, I was inexperienced, and my fear at the time, because my wife was really the first woman that really kind of loved me. For me, it's like I could do no wrong in her eyes, and she just thought I was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And up until that point in my life, I never had a woman love me or treat me that way. And so, what my fear was, it's fear that if I didn't stay together with her or I didn't marry her, that I would never ever find anybody that loved me like that again, because I didn't really understand at the time how attraction works, what causes a woman to stay with one guy versus another, while you see some dumpy looking average or even unattractive guy with an absolutely smoking hot girl, and she dotes on him and she's all over him.
Yeah.
And then you have another guy who's handsome and good looking and is killing it financially and is doing great, and he's got a hot girlfriend or wife that just has zero respect for him, doesn't admire the guy, doesn't respect the guy, and does and says things that make him look bad.
Yeah.
And groups of people on the internet complain it's no fault divorce and that kind of thing. I mean, my own grandfather on my dad's side, it's like he stayed married to my grandmother his whole life. They had three kids together, and obviously my dad and my two uncles. But as when I was growing up, my mom would tell us stories that my grandfather was in the Merchant Marine, and so when he was traveling overseas, he's going to Bangkok and hooking up with hookers, and then in his letters home to my well, at least one of my uncles,
Yeah.
he would brag about his exploits and what he had done and how he banged the hell out of this hooker or whatever, and
Oh my
then
gosh.
my aunt would see these letters and cards in my uncle's drawer and read them, and then she'd be on the phone with my mom telling her what's going on.
Yeah.
And so he wasn't faithful to her. And I mean, it's like a lot of in the old days, you even see this in some of the old movies. It was pretty common for guys that were married that they had mistresses, especially in Latin culture. It's
Hmm.
kind of accepted in Latin culture that, the men are going to kind of screw around, or they're going to have a mistress, or they might have a girlfriend or a side piece that they have an apartment for, and they get together with her a few times a week. I've had friends that were Muslim that were married to their wives, but it was an arranged marriage and they weren't really that happy. And they had girlfriends on the side,
Wow.
girlfriends that they had kids with and they had a family with,
Hmm.
and, operated like a Muslim with multiple lives or multiple wives in Western society and navigating in the laws that, in that case, he couldn't marry multiple women, but he could
Yeah.
have a wife who he loved and he had kids with, but he wasn't deeply in love with her because, again, it was an arranged marriage. And then he had his girlfriend on the side who he absolutely loved
Yeah.
and had kids with. And just because of the nature of the country and the laws, it's like that's how he chose to keep things separate.
Like an open marriage.
I wouldn't say it wasn't an open marriage because he had a wife and he had a girlfriend that he was, and it's not like he was out banging a bunch of other girls. He had his wife and he had his girlfriend and he had kids with
It's
both of
open
them.
then.
Oh, you could say he had multiple wives, but that wasn't legal. So his way to be a pious, humble Muslim
Hmm.
was to stay married to his wife and to have a girlfriend that he treated like his wife and also had a family with her. And he never really mingled the families or the kids. He kind of kept them separate just because women tend to get catty about things like that because they have an innate fear that they're going to lose their protector or their
Yeah.
provider, which is understandable. So they each had their own houses, and
I
he
hope
kept
she
them
had a
separate.
boyfriend on the corner or
Nope,
something.
nope.
I would have.
It was haram.
Oh gosh.
It was not acceptable. But I think the reality is that I mean, my own parents got divorced. My mother had severe mental illness and health challenges that got in the way of my dad having a normal relationship with her. And but like I said, I got tons of my friends, tons of my family, people who've been married and divorced, sometimes multiple times. Sometimes it was the third marriage or the second marriage
Hmm.
that they went the distance. I mean, you look at Donald Trump. I mean, it wasn't until his third wife that he got it right, and it seems pretty obvious that I mean, he was on a date with another woman when he met Melania, and
Yeah.
she didn't care. She still hit on him and asked for his phone number,
Hmm.
and he gave her his office number, his cell phone number, and his home number.
Hmm.
And 2 weeks later, she called him, and they went on a date. She didn't care that he was on a date with another girl, or that he was a womanizer, or that he was popular with the ladies. She liked him, and she wanted him, and she went after him,
And she won him.
and she won him. And even despite that, it's pretty obvious that he continued to step out on her. Apparently, I guess when she was even pregnant, but she
What?
knew what he was all about.
Oh my
He was a
gosh.
bad he was a bad boy player. Ladies loved him in most cases,
It's horrible.
but it's that was his lifestyle. That's how it worked for him. And so I look at it is that like for me, just I mean, we were married a year, we didn't have kids or anything, and we had a very amicable divorce.
Hmm.
But we had a house that we had to sell, plus we had some debt, which I ended up, because my business did well, I paid all that off, and we were able to sell the house. But because of interference with a boyfriend who was very insecure that she got into a relationship after me, he was worried that I was going to come back, and so he did and said things that encouraged her to lean on her attorney more and be kind of a little bit more adversarial, which just drug the process out. And
Yeah.
it really should have been over and done with in a year, and I think it was 2 3 years before I finally got the court date and got the dissolution of the marriage and everything, just because the her attorney drug it out because she had given him a big retainer and he was trying to spend all the money. And it wasn't until I figured that out that I got on the phone with her dad and was like, we agreed when we split up how everything was going to be handled, and she gave this guy a really big retainer, and it's obvious what he's trying to do is he probably spent it, and he's probably broke,
Yeah.
and he doesn't want to have to give her any money of the retainer back because he doesn't have it because he probably spent it.
Yeah.
And he thanked me for it, and I remember it was like 9:30 the next morning. My attorney called me and said, "Hey, we got the signed separation or settlement agreement.
Yeah.
Now we can schedule your hearing to get divorced."
Mm-hmm.
And so it took me calling my father-in-law because he was a gentleman. He was a sophisticated guy. He was a doctor,
Yeah.
and he was a good, honorable man. And informed him what was going on. He thanked me for it, and then he jerked a knot in her her attorney's ass to quit dragging it out and
Yeah.
finish the divorce and give her whatever was left of the retainer money back instead of just trying to scam her out of the money.
Yeah.
And like I said, the very next day, we got a signed settlement agreement. And
The attorney
but
was the boyfriend?
huh? No, the
Oh.
boyfriend that she had was, he was worried about me coming back,
Yeah.
and because I had left her, and she still loved me, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
and he was insecure about it, and so he did things to kind of get in the way and kind of create some, because she and I had parted on good ways. We would hang out together, go to lunch, we were our mutual friends or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and we were divorcing on good terms. And then between him and the attorney she had, it drug things out for like a year and a half, and everything I went through, it's like I didn't have kids, we didn't have big marital assets or
Right.
anything like that. So I can only imagine that, even just being in Florida
Mm-hmm.
and having to pay alimony, child support, and all the negotiation that goes on for years. And what really ends up happening, any guy that's got any sizable amount of money, whether it's his attorney or the woman's attorney, it's in the interest, the financial interest of the attorneys to keep the conflict going.
Yeah.
And so the longer they keep the conflict going, they can keep writing letters back and forth and billing their clients by the hour.
Right.
And what ends up happening is you have a nice little chunk of cash,
Mm-hmm.
and you have nice assets, and then you go and you get divorced, and you end up with a fraction of the assets. She ends up with a fraction of it, and the majority of the assets go to the attorneys
Yeah.
and their bills. And so financially, it's a bad deal for most guys, especially if you live in a blue state. And so if I ever got married again, it would be a civil type
Mm-hmm.
of, we'd have it like it'd be a partnership agreement that you have in business. And
Right.
a partnership agreement spells out what your duties are to the partnership, what the other person's duties are, what the consequences are if you don't fulfill your duties. And if you don't fulfill your duties for a certain length of time, or maybe you become incapacitated,
Mm-hmm.
then how do you disengage? How do you dissolve the partnership and go your separate ways? And if you can't agree to all those terms up front, especially when it comes to business,
Yeah.
then you don't make a bad deal that has a lot of downside risk. You just simply don't do the deal and you move
Right.
on. But, typically what you're going to have, you have kids, then you got to figure out, you can agree ahead of time how, if you're going to have children together, it's the objective is you both want to have and make great human beings that someday you'll be proud of and say, "Oh, look, my son, look, my daughter, they're fucking amazing.
Yeah.
Makes my whole life and everything I've been through worth it. I'm so proud of them."
Mm-hmm.
Whether you stay together or not, your mutual goal and mission should be both of you to together co-parent a child that grows up someday and maybe invents a longer lasting light bulb or something that you can admire and appreciate, that you're going to leave the world with some cool people.
Yeah. And they
You're
can
going to
take
leave.
care of you.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
that too, but also that you want to have kids that you're proud of, because it's like when you look at what in prison, 80% of the dudes that are in prison grew up without a father. They grew up, then they were raised by single moms, and
Yeah.
kids need a mom and a dad. And when you got two people co-parenting that hate each other, and especially in some states, the woman can use the court system to really punish and get revenge on the guy for whatever reason. She's mad he didn't love her, or he hurt her, or or whatever. He left her, or he caused her to resent him because of his behavior or whatever. It's, when women get emotional in a divorce, I've had friends of mine get divorced, like one in particular. I thought they had a pretty good happy marriage because I was friends with both of them, but they were putting on an act.
Yeah.
And then in the middle of the divorce process, she convinced him to sign a quitclaim deed for the mansion that they had together, and he was going to keep all the rental properties. And so he just signed a quitclaim deed,
Yeah.
thinking is we have kids together. It's like we were a team for a decade or more.
Hmm.
No big deal. And then when the papers actually came, she wanted to keep the whole house and she wanted half the rental properties.
Mm.
And he was like, well, we agreed on this. And you asked the judge, and the judge's like, well, you signed a quitclaim deed to the residence, so now it's hers.
Yeah.
She owns it. You don't have any claim on it because you
That's
literally
crazy.
signed it away. And I remember
Yeah.
asking, was like, well, dude, why didn't you call me and ask me this before you just sign a quitclaim deed before you have a signed
Yeah.
separation agreement? And he's like, well, I didn't. Nobody wants to admit to their friend that they've been a bitch with their wife.
Yeah.
And so, and after all was said and done, what she said to him, and I love her to death. She's still a friend of mine. I still love both of them, and their kids are cool people. And but what she said to him is, I wanted to make it so you didn't have enough money to start another family.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
She wanted to
That's
financially damage
spiteful.
him. Yeah, it was very spiteful because he left her.
Mm-hmm.
But she had been treating him the way he wanted to be treated, and they didn't have sex for like the last 3 years of their relationship. Not at all.
Wow.
No sex. He was sleeping in a completely separate bedroom.
That's bad.
And so eventually he left. And I mean, that's a pretty vindictive thing to say. And to see two people that I love both of them to be an observer on the outside of this is like, to see her go from that, the person I've always known, to
Yeah.
like, I'm going to really make you pay and punish you for not staying with me or not loving me or whatever. I want to take as many of your financial assets as I can in order to make you so broke that you wouldn't even think about having kids with another woman.
Wow.
And he since, got remarried. The ink was barely dry on his divorce papers, and he was already remarried and already having more kids.
Wow.
But it's those things happen, and so everybody knows somebody that's been through something like that. So it's, why involve the government in your relationship when you don't have to? Why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free? And if you buy a house together, or you start a business together, or you have assets together, you can have a partnership agreement that spells out exactly who is supposed to do what and what are the consequences if you don't do that. If you don't stay together, how are you going to co-parent the child?
Yeah.
Who's going to, is somebody going to be a stay-at-home mom, a stay-at-home dad, or work from, like, how are you going to figure that out? And if you can't agree to all that stuff up front, then you shouldn't have a partnership.
Right.
You shouldn't go into business together. You shouldn't get married together. You shouldn't have children together. It's just that the way the legal system is, it's just not a good deal to involve the government in your marriage these days. And so, and the other thing is, you got the rise of information like books like mine. So guys have choices. They don't feel trapped. They don't feel fearful like they'll never find anybody better or somebody better suited to them, somebody whose goals and values align
Yeah.
with their own. I mean, sometimes guys will marry, as what Quentin Curtis says, bum bitches, women that are liars and cheaters and have no integrity whatsoever. And it's like, it's gonna happen. Same thing. Sometimes women marry guys that are just dirtbags and losers.
Yeah.
It happens. So I think it's just people wised up. They became educated. Obviously, people aren't as religious as they used to be, and it's just, things change. Society evolves.
Yeah. Everyone's afraid of commitment now. So even the thought of marriage, people are running away.
Well, it's getting, if it doesn't work out, trying to get out of it is such an excruciatingly unpleasant
Yeah.
and expensive experience. And oftentimes when people come through that on the other end, they end up hating each other. It's like,
Yeah.
my friend and his ex-wife they're pretty adversarial even after they agreed to everything, just because of the way she behaved. And then she still wanted him to do things for her, and in the field of work that he was in, he's like, fuck you. After
Yeah.
what you did, it's like, we can exchange the children when we have to do our co-parenting things. I mean, they're on much better terms. I mean, at this point, he actually sat down and had a heart to heart with her and Because it wasn't until he was with his new wife that he really realized how he hadn't shown up as a man when they were married.
Yeah.
And that was partly why she was so hurt and so mad and so angry and so resentful,
Mhm.
is because he had become a beta male and he let her basically become the man in the relationship,
Yeah.
and she resented him for it because she had to basically become the man and he became the woman.
And one thing like us women really hate is when you kind of prepare a guy like you're kind of like the test dummy for the next girl, like the main girl. And it makes
Crash test dummy.
yeah, it just makes you feel very just worthless in a way. It's like why couldn't you do that with me? You know, like why couldn't you be that way with me? So I could see where she felt that way, but not to the point to leave him dry like that.
Yeah, she cleaned his clock financially, and he's got a new family to worry about. So he's got to work harder. He's got to work longer. He put off his plans for retirement, but then again, I don't think men should ever retire. All men have to have a purpose. Every guy that I've ever known that has sold their company for tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, they sat on the beach for 6 months or a year. They swayed in their hammock. They swam in their pool. They cruised around in their yacht. They traveled around the world. They bought themselves a nice car or built a custom home or whatever, and then they were bored out of their mind. And so what
Yeah.
ended up happening? They started a new business to
Hmm.
give them a purpose and a mission in life, and then they felt alive again.
Yeah.
So I think until you're either dead or incapacitated and can't work, you got to do something. It keeps your brain sharp.
Yeah.
What I know about taking care of your body between, I mean, you got to push weights around and you have to do cardio,
Hmm.
because at the cellular level, if you're pushing heavier weight around than you are and you're moving big things and you're doing cardio, you're communicating to your human organism that you are a life enhancing and a life seeking being. You seek to contribute. When people are extremely unhealthy, when like you see like something like a peacock in nature,
Hmm.
where you have one peacock that the male feathers are very beautiful and the colors are real rich,
Hmm.
and then you have another peacock where the colors are faded and the feathers are kind of broken and they
Yeah.
don't look properly formed and it doesn't look healthy. The female is not going to be attracted to the ratchet looking peacock. She's
Yeah.
going to be attracted to the really virulent, healthy, alpha looking type of peacock.
Yeah.
And so in nature, any kind of organism that's not healthy and has health problems, it gets eliminated. It's like
Hmm.
things get turned on at the cellular level that basically cause that organism to die. Anything
Yeah.
that stops contributing in nature dies. If a tree stops growing, what happens? It dies. If you stop pushing weights around and doing cardio and eating healthy, you're sending a signal to your organism that you no longer care. You're in a sedentary life. And so you're not really doing much. You're not really contributing to the world. You're letting yourself go. You're letting yourself
Yeah.
atrophy. You're letting yourself rot and decay. And that's basically what happens to your body. You're sending a signal to your body that you just have no will to live. And eventually your body conforms to that till you are no longer alive.